I just think that there is so much that you bring to the table, not only professionally as media, theory, studies, scholar, research, published author, journals, speaker, the whole gamut in talking about media and its effects and impact on cultures and how we see ourselves and how we see life. You have that you bring to the table for us to learn from, and we're going to talk about that, especially given that we happen to have scheduled this part 2 with you shortly after the Hamas attack happened in Israel and Israel's retaliation that has resulted into, I think the latest figures I saw were over 5,000 Palestinian civilians and 1,400 Israeli civilians, with over 200 hostages being held by Hamas. That's as of where we are today in recording. So we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to ask you some questions around your own personal development, because some people don't know that when I'm working with communicators, I am working with them as people, as human beings in their own personal development, which ends up showing up in their professional development. And it shows up in their work through language, through actions and paradigms and narratives, etc. And so having you back to kind of demonstrate for us and giving us context of the role of media on what we learn, how we see the world, and then how we see ourselves, especially as communicators and those who are putting language out there to create a certain container. So that relationship from the external to the internal, and then from the internal to the external again, and the profound impact of what that cyclical relationship has on us and our audiences. So if you don't mind, Dr. Massey, just reintroducing yourself, and then I would love to start getting in on especially media and research and its effects.
Okay. I'm Kimb Massey. I'm a radio, television, film professor at San Jose State University. And I've been there for 37 years. And so in all of that time, I probably taught, I know, I've probably taught everything once, from production. I've written a book on radio production, to theory, research, of course, and then ultimately in the end of my career, my focus is on media and culture, which is I've been doing the whole time. And then I run the radio station, KSJS FM 90.5 on your FM dial in the Bay Area. So that's been my lifelong career. I've taken sabbaticals along the way and professional development leaves to work in the industry. And I've worked for advertising, and I've been a media consultant for decades as well. So tried to get out of the institution often enough to where, I was actually working professionally in the world, so that I could come back and and teach my students what I had learned from actually doing it instead of just talking about it. So that's been sort of my career path.
Beautiful, beautiful. Just last week, I made a post on LinkedIn where my girlfriend, Christy, recorded me working on some client materials, and I was on the couch. And I was rocking out to my headphones. And so I'm dancing, while I'm sitting on the couch and I'm working on client materials, on some client work. And she captured it. And she's like, I think you should post this. And I said, well, that is what I look like when I'm working on client work. And when I posted it, people were like, what were you listening to? What was the song? And I said, well, I used to be a college radio DJ. And I put together a Spotify playlist that encompasses a lot of my favorite music that I used to play when I was at KSJS. That's the connection of my story to your background. And people were saying, well, we want a playlist made by Kim Clark. Like, let us in on it. And so I think I was listening to the Chemical Brothers, Block Rockin' Beats in that particular moment. And somebody said, oh, I thought for sure it was the Prodigy. And I said, oh, I've got 3 songs from the Prodigy on that playlist. And one of them is Firestarter. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we do here at this podcast. And that's what I do when I'm working with clients, is that we're fire starters in a way that is productive and healing and inclusive. Before we get into your incredible depth of knowledge around media and culture and effects, I want people to get to know your background a little bit more, because I think how your background and what your work has been, especially around diversity, equity, inclusion, I have seen it really evolve and show up more and more, and how you show up. So there's this information that you've gotten from your background that is showing up in who you are today and the conversations that you're having today and the work that you're leading personally and professionally. So let us get to know your background a little bit more.
Okay. I want to say I saw that post of you rocking out, and my first thought was classic Kim. And I was to see you so happy doing your work. I always appreciate that. And yesterday I was on a panel for Star Trek, and an older man, I guess he would be, in comparison to being a student, walked up to me and said, you were a TA for me. This before I became a professor. You were a TA for me back in 1986. And I went, wow. And he said, I couldn't believe it. I came to this panel and they introduced you. And I thought, is that her? Because he hadn't seen me since I was like 24. So that was kind of interesting. So yeah, a little bit background. And it has been, as we all do. We all have our, maybe it was a mixtape back in the day, but we all have our playlists that provide the musical background of our lives. And we all, I hope, evolve and change over time. So I was born a white woman, and I was born in a little podunk town in Texas, about 29 miles from El Paso, right along the border. So the border was about 2 miles from my house. And so therefore, there were the majority of my growing up peers and people in town and the people that I dealt with at work, at the grocery store or whatever, were in those days we were called Hispanics, and now it's the Latin community. So I learned Spanish from the get-go. I'm fluent in Spanish because nobody talked English on the playground from the very start. So in class it was English, and with a little peppering of Spanish, but out in the playground it was just Spanish. So you have to go along to get along and learn, because these are going to be the people that you are friends with and the people that you're going to fall in, puppy love with, and you're going to have arguments with, and friendships are going to end and new ones are going to begin. Because I went to the same, I stayed in that little town from the time I started school to the day I graduated. So I had a very different viewpoint about, because in terms of numbers, okay, in terms of culture, because I do know the difference, I was a minority in terms of numbers, right? But in terms of culture, I still wasn't, because even though there weren't that many white people or white students in my high school, for example, the privilege of the ones that were kind of gained privilege, even though we weren't. My father was a small town newspaper man, and by no stretch of anybody's imagination were we rich. We weren't even middle class. We were lower class. Very small house that my dad couldn't afford to buy, so we paid $50 a month rent or whatever it was, and one room in our house was dirt. And we were we didn't make a lot of money, but we were white, right? So the perception and the privilege that was placed on us, well, but you're white, so you get things, or people will listen to you, or they'll pay more attention to you. And so I saw that growing up. My mom, she wasn't a helicopter mom, but she was a very involved mom, and she would be on the school board or whatever. And if somebody else had a problem at school and didn't feel comfortable going and talking to administrators that were probably going to be white, they would call up my mom, and my mom would go with them. So in that way, you're seeing this sort of white hero narrative playing out, right? And I grew up in a very racist place, along the border. White people were very racist, and it didn't make sense to me. So I was always asking questions. I'd say, well, like, why are you saying these things about Mexican people? Because many of my peers were Mexican nationals that were coming across the border to get educated or whatever. And why would you say something disparaging about my friend Sarah? I don't understand. It didn't make sense. It doesn't apply. I know her. I know her mom. I know her family. Everybody, right? So why is that? And so I was taught that because there's difference, but we're different than them. And I'd say, but what about this person? And they'd say, well, she's been Americanized. What does that mean? So I was being raised in the best way that my parents knew how to raise me. No harm, no foul. It was the 50s and 60s, but it didn't make sense to me. So I kept pushing back a little bit. I was not a sassy daughter or anything like that, very respectful, but this doesn't make sense to me. But, I didn't have any alternative points of view coming at me from media, right? I mean, there were only 3 channels in those days, ABC, CBS, NBC, and all of the stories were like Ozzie and Harriet, and, they were all white stories. So I wasn't being given any sort of alternative reality to contemplate. So I didn't know I was in a box because I was in the box and I wasn't getting any information otherwise. Okay. And even my friends who were Latino or Mexican nationals or whatever, they weren't challenging the box either because it was like, that's the way it is. And so the culture back then was a much more, well, that's the way it is sort of mentality. So if you disagreed with your president, for example, President Nixon, for example, my father would tell me, you don't know. You don't know what he knows. He's the president and he knows stuff, right? So I was a little twirler in a Nixon Now parade. My father took a picture and constantly throws that in my face all the time. Because later, when I became a liberal, and my father is a lifelong Republican, we would have conversations about politics. He would disagree with the president, and I would say, but you don't know what Bill Clinton's thinking. He knows stuff you don't know. Like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So it was a very interesting way to grow up, but at a very young age, it did not make sense to me. It seemed, but it wasn't even political for me. It was more like meanness. It seemed mean to treat somebody like they were less than. I mean, I have the language to talk about it now. At the time, I didn't really have the language. And I thought my role was to stand up for and say, hey, no, you can't treat this person this way. Or if I went, this happened to me more times than I can count. If I was in a restaurant and there was a Black person sitting in a table by themselves, or anybody of color, and they were getting kind of treated badly, meanly, or being completely ignored by the wait staff, I felt like it was my job to stand up, to walk over there and say, no, this person was in front of me in line, or why aren't you serving this person breakfast? They're with me. I had no other way to deal with the situation because I didn't know any other way. And that's, again, the hero narrative. It shouldn't be like that. But I was so young, I didn't know what else to do except to say, this isn't okay, and I'm not going to stand for it. Like, well, if you're not going to feed that person breakfast, then I'm not going to eat breakfast, whatever a young kid could do, right? And so that's sort of how it went. And then I went off to college, and I worked for a politician who was Latin descent and was a representative for El Paso, Texas. And then I got to see how the Texas House of Representatives worked, which was predominantly white. And how
Republican
those
or Democrat?
No, he was Democrat. Bobby
Democrat?
Baez.
Okay.
So that was interesting. And I got to see also, not Bobby, I'll say for the record, not Bobby, but I got to see other Latin representatives hire Latinos to be on their staff, but not in the secretarial positions because they wanted white people welcoming people into the office. And I would say, how can you do that? Like, this is your chance to open the door. And, and it's like, I don't want I want to make sure there's a white person that's at the desk saying, "Oh, hi, let me take a message or let me go get the representative." And I thought that was interesting, right? So it just kept going as it is, because that's the way the world is. And now I'm old. I'm older. I'm an older woman. I'm in my 60s now, and I have evolved to the point where I know that I show up to meetings and stuff, and there's big swaths of time where I don't say anything because it isn't my place to say anything. They don't need to know what the opinion is, no matter how long I've been working at San Jose State, even though I'm a senior faculty level, right? Because I'm the person that's been there the longest. My institutional knowledge or my decades of experience still doesn't matter whenever it comes to issues of making sure that everyone gets a voice in the room. They don't need to hear my opinion anymore. They've heard enough from me, right? I will back up, or I will ask questions or something like that. But so much of it isn't my story to tell. And it's inappropriate for me to tell somebody else's story when somebody is actually there to do that, right? And making sure that somebody is actually there to do that. And so that's where it is, I mean, when I was told, well, you can be friends with Latinos and Black people and Asian people and whatever, but you can't date them. Or, there was always these sort of hurdles and barriers. And I would say, well, I don't understand. And, but ultimately you become an adult, and then you get to do whatever you want, and your parents can just roll their eyes, or they can just be disappointed. Or in the case of mine, I'm happy to say they can change. They can evolve, and they ask tough questions like, what about that? And then I'm able to come back and say, that is because that's the way you were raised, and that is because that's the world that you live in, but that world is never going to change if you don't change. So that's been, at some point you just have to say, everybody's got, live and let live. And when I go home, I'm called the egghead and the liberal, and you're living out there in California with all those people, and I kind of go, yeah, I am, but they still love me, and I still love them. And we do still have difficult conversations, even though my parents are now in their 90s. We still have the difficult conversations, because I think it's important to practice, if nothing else, having difficult conversations.
Yeah, we're not very skilled at that. We don't have, and especially in the workplace, we do not have great role models on how to have these conversations. And for the most part, they were intentionally left out of the workplace prior to 2020. And then when people started coming back to work after shelter in place, et cetera, then there was this expression, there was this need, there was this energy of wanting to talk about it, wanting to learn about it. And we did not have. That's where a lot of my work coming out of 2020 was focused on, helping people build the skills just to foster the container and the trust, the environment to allow people to make mistakes, to be genuine in their curiosity, to learn how to apologize, how to call in, as one of the options when microaggressions or harassment occurs. And so there's a lot of, calling in and harassment. No, that you need to escalate that. But if a microaggression occurs, especially unintentional, we have tools now. And so we're learning, and some of us have more practice than others. You have a lot more practice than most folks, but you've also entered yourself into situations where you'll hear something, or you'll see something said, or somebody will come at you with a comment of like, why did you say that? Because somebody else is uncomfortable, and you are allowing that space to have the conversation, and you're holding that mutual respect. I've seen it. You're holding the respect within these conversations, where this is something I teach my clients all the time, is we must find ways within our dialogues, within our communications, to keep each other's human dignity intact. There's always a line where safety is concerned, whether it's emotional, mental, or physical safety. We have to get out of a situation. There's always that line. And that line can often be crossed by the person or people that we're we're interacting with, and we need to know what that boundary is to where we just stop and we have ourselves and make sure that we're in a safe situation. But otherwise, there is some room for conversation that some of us don't take advantage of.
Yeah, I think the place that I almost always start, inadvertently, by the way, but I try to always start with the idea that there's more than one way of looking at something, and nobody in the room should be getting 100% of what they want. Nobody in the room should be getting 100% of what they want. And anybody who thinks they deserve 100%, let's start there, because that is privilege. That is privilege. And the part that you are negotiating, I don't want to even say sacrificing, because that's the problem. Well, I didn't get exactly what I wanted, but I only got 80%. So I gave up, in quotes, right? I gave up 20% to negotiate, collaborate, cooperate. And I'm like, you're not giving up anything. You're investing. You're investing. So everybody needs to invest in providing space and time, a lot of time. I'm currently in a group where culturally, a couple of the members of the group, they're not chatty, Kathy, like me. I mean, they're not the same as me. They need time to stop and think and, quiet for a few minutes and so I said, okay, I finished speaking and I say, and I'm just going to sit here and take as much time as you need. You don't have to say anything at all, or you can, or whatever. Because I feel like whoever's the more dominant personality in the room, right, is putting pressure on another person by saying, well, what do you have to say about that? You know what I mean? And so you have to learn that there's different communication styles. There's different cultural communication styles, because I'm a senior faculty member and maybe they feel like, well, they're a junior faculty member, or, there's a whole lot going on. So I try to make everybody understand that we are all, none of us should be getting everything we want, because we want there to be a collective good that comes out of this. That's where I usually start. And that's mostly to get the white people in the room to back off and give up the ghost of believing that they deserve something. And if they're not getting exactly what they think, not the group thinks, right, that they think they deserve, then that somehow they've been wronged. Okay, that's where I start. And then the second place I go after that is when you make a mistake, not if, but when. When you make a mistake, you have to make it right. Apologies, sure, but apologies don't go very far if you keep making the mistake, right? You have to do three things. You have to apologize. You have to tell the person who was wronged. You don't need to understand why. That's the other thing, is we're like, why do they need different pronouns? You don't need to understand that. You don't need to understand that. What you need to understand is that's a necessity. And it doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't take away from your pronoun to use a different pronoun. So stop putting that in your I deserve this pile. I said it's really easy for somebody whose pronouns are the standard to stand back and say, well, adding any pronouns, what is that about? Well, yeah, because you're represented, right? So you need to understand, stop, apologize, but then make it right by the other person. You don't say, well, I apologize, and if they don't like it, well, I'm done. You go to that person and you say, what can I do? Because I made a mistake and I'm really sorry. And along with my apology, I would like to do something more. And that is, how can I make it right by you? From your perspective, what would need to happen to get us back on track? Knowing that I made a mistake, knowing that I apologize, but that I made it right from your perspective. And just doing that goes so far, because when that person tells you, here's what I need you to do to make it right by me, they're also teaching you about the mistake. So you further understand why it was a mistake. Not that they need to explain themselves. I don't mean that. I'm not even saying you ask for an explanation like, well, why was that offensive to you? No. You don't need to understand why. What you need to know is, don't do it again and make it right by the other person. And the best way to not do it again is to understand it to the best of your ability and keep trying to learn, right? So that's what that to me is. And I use the depth model, by the by, because I think it's a really nice, neutrally not charged way of saying, all right, let me look at what I'm doing here, or let me look at what I've done here, or I did, because I've used the DEP model when I didn't do anything wrong. I've used the DEP model when I do things wrong, right? So it isn't just a tool to patch it up. It's a tool to understand a really nice, basic kind of way of approaching something that's neutral in a highly charged situation, so that you are actually taking the time to process. Because that's the work.
What, people, we don't, yeah. And that's something that I don't talk enough about, is you can actually use the depth model on your own personal, interpersonal communications. Now, it was designed for organizations on helping them position themselves on social messaging and DEI communications from a place of authenticity, in a way that they can actually produce meaningful change. Something, they should only be talking about things like they can actually change, fix, influence, reduce harm, those kinds of things on an external basis. Internally, that's a different story. And that's for another podcast. But absolutely, I think I do mention it somewhere around people managers, where I talk about that you can use it as a manager tool, but not only a manager of team, but a self-manager. It's a framework that you can do it.
I guess in my world, the personal isn't that separate from the professional, right? Because I'm going into a classroom full of 80 people, and I'm saying to them, now everything that's coming out of my mouth is coming out of an older, white, privileged point of view. Okay, but I'm doing the work, and I have guest lecturers in, and I have them reading things that were not written by white women or whoever I am, right? I'm doing that kind of work. But the people that, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just saying the people that are going to be implementing the depth model in their communication as a corporation, who do you think is doing that? It's people in a meeting. It's human beings in a meeting making decisions that are good for the company, but it's still human beings in a meeting making those decisions, and they have to be able to have those conversations in those meetings. And why wouldn't you apply the depth model personally if you're going to be applying it to your company? I just feel like I just don't want people to say, well, that doesn't affect me because I disagree, or that's just the corporate line. Right? But the corporate line is people, right? It's the people making the rules. It's the people making the policies. It's the people making the work environment that's either effective and fair or not. And it's the people being affected by all of those choices. So it all comes down to, you can be the CEO if you want to or whatever, but it all comes down to human beings doing work, inclusive work with other human beings, so that everybody gets to be thought about, that everybody gets a say and everybody gets to contribute a point of view. And that is the best situation you can ever have, because then you don't miss anything. You don't miss, well, we didn't see that was going to cause us to lose all these employees, or somebody was going to steal our employees away to a company that is doing that, or whatever. It gives you that opportunity to connect with other people and move us in a direction that I think deep down we really all want to go, right? We all want to go to a more equal, fair, peaceful future. And we have history to look at. We're not going to get there if it's an elitism situation forever. The French Revolution.
Not a sustainable plan. Yeah, absolutely not.
I think deep down they know it.
Yeah, well, that's the desperation that we're seeing. And to when you were talking about, the area that you were raised in, where numerically being white was numerically in the minority, but the power was still within the numerical minority because of the social
Right.
context and construct. And so when people use data, including myself, when I say the demographic shifts have already happened and are going to continue to happen with the United States, people, what we have to keep in mind is that context of, even if white folks are becoming more of a numerical minority, it doesn't mean that the ideology and the constructs of power
Right.
are
Or
going
the
to shift
systemic
right along with that.
That is correct. And look at apartheid, very small number of the population were dominating the vast majority of the population. But also, I mean, we don't have to look at apartheid. We can look at America. We can look at America, where you have a vast majority of people who aren't in control of space and money and systems, and a very small minority of people are way over influencing all of that. A very small number of people, and they're very specific kinds of people that are bigger influences on all of that than the majority of people that are going to be affected by it. So you don't even have to look outside the country.
Right. And we have listeners from all over the world as well. So please make it real for you in the region that you're in and from. So when you're using the depth model, Dr. Massey, is one part where, so I'll just go over, like, the depth model is the secret sauce in the book that Janet Stovall and I co-authored called The Conscious Communicator, the fine art of not saying stupid shit, to which Dr. Massey is a contributor. She has an article within the book. And so the depth model is an acronym. D is deliberate, E is educated, P is purposeful, T is tailored, and H is habitual. So out of the DEPTH, are any one of those giving you a harder time when you apply it?
That's an excellent question, by the way. I don't think anybody who met me could possibly say that I'm not deliberate. I'm all about education. I'm a professor, for goodness sake. And purposeful? Yeah, absolutely. I'm purposeful and passionate. When you read my student evaluations, that's what they say. Boy, is she into her topic. She is very passionate and purposeful about what she's doing. And it's infectious, right? But I think the category or the step that is the most difficult for me is the tailored one. And the way that you define it is, when you're tailoring a message, am I the one who should be, like, do I have a right to be communicating this message? And, like, sort of, to whom am I about to communicate that message? That for me has been the most difficult, because there is pretty much no way I'm going to enter a room of non-white people. I don't care what they're doing, of any profession, from anywhere, anytime. And I'm not going to come in and tell them what I think of them, or what I think of their story, or what their story is. That's never going to happen for me ever again. Now, I have written books, and I've edited books, more importantly, edited books at a time when I had to really push my editor to get diverse voices, because I said, I have no right to talk about this stuff. I want Bell Hooks, for example. Before she was super famous, she was always wonderful, but before she was super famous, I put one of her essays in an edited book of mine for media neglected voices, because in my view, it isn't just what you're hearing from media and what that's doing to us. It's what you're not hearing from media that you should be hearing from media, because media should be including everybody's voice. And whenever I had that, the publisher pushed back and said, why doesn't she capitalize her name? And, she uses colorful language, they called it, right? Because she says damn or whatever she said. I mean, by today's standards, forget about it. And I said, it doesn't matter. And you're not changing it. They wanted to change, like clean up the language and, I guess, capitalize her name. And I said, no. And I had a very good editor named Holly Allen. And I went to Holly, another white woman, but another white woman doing good work, I feel. And I said, Holly, I'm not doing it, and here's why. And you have no right to do that. And she went, I will make this happen. I will keep that essay in the book and they will not change a word. And I went, and I know she put her reputation on the line to make all that happen. And who knew if the book was going to sell, right? It was connected to a textbook. I thought, whatever. And the next thing I knew, Carly called me and said, we're running a second edition. We're running a third edition, because Chicano Studies started using the book. African-American Studies were using the book. Women's Studies started using the book because it had essays written by the people, for the people to whom these things were affecting the most. I mean, I would argue that it affects all of us. It diminishes all of us when somebody's voice is missing. It diminishes white people too, but they just don't realize it, right? Or maybe they do, but my conversations tend to be with people who not necessarily, and whenever I show them, hey, this is affecting all of us. This is all of our futures. You don't need to be the majority and the most powerful. It doesn't have to be like that, right? So I would say that is the most difficult one for me, because whenever I start talking about it with other white people, that's one of the questions that pops up, like, well, why are you doing this? Like, this isn't even your problem. Like, you're a heterosexual, white, cisgendered woman. Like, those words never show up, but that's what I am. And why would you do this? I mean, and I said, because we're all supposed to be doing this, right? And you and I talked in the last podcast about how if the civil rights movement didn't have also white people saying this is not right, then it may not have happened. If the LGBTQ plus movement did not also have non-LGBTQ plus people, it would have taken longer for sure, but it may not have happened as nicely as it did or whatever. So we're all supposed to be wanting fairness and equality. And so I have to really watch and make sure I'm not speaking for somebody else, especially when there's somebody else available to do that. And if there's not, my job is to make sure there is, if I'm on the panel or I'm putting together something, right? And secondly, acknowledging that I'm not the person who's best talk about these things, right? When there's not somebody in the situation I find myself in to do that. And acknowledging, like, okay, look, I'm just telling you, I know I'm a cisgendered white woman of privilege, but here's a viewpoint that you're not thinking about here who isn't in the room. And here's some references for you to go to so you can hear the viewpoint coming from those actual groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we started off with your personal story, and we set the context that who we are and our upbringing, it paints a picture and gives us a mindset and a paradigm of how do we understand the world. And then you demonstrated how that is showing up for you professionally and what you're doing just in interactions and in conversations with people. I want to touch base before I let you go, given, this time period, as I mentioned in our open, of when we're recording this. So there's a lot of concern around the language around Israel and Hamas, the impact of the Israeli and Palestinian people as it relates to, being directly impacted, obviously, where innocent people who are living their lives, sitting in their homes, are dying as a result of these decisions made by these government and these military entities. And it has reverberated throughout the world. So I've been doing a lot of navigating with clients for their organizations, primarily on internal communications, language, events, how do we support all those kinds of things. One of the things that comes up constantly is really ensuring that we are gut checking our sources, that we stay in a fact mode, and make sure that we are watching out and not reiterating any dehumanizing language. And so can you talk about that relationship of media representation, good guys, bad guys, and stereotypes, especially around cultures, languages, faiths that the dominant majorities, particularly in the United States and in Western Europe as well, have less understanding or exposure to in a positive light. And so if you can help us kind of understand that those stereotypes, the narratives, and how they're playing out right now, that we need to guide ourselves in being more consciously aware to ensure that we're not reaffirming or, continuing and supporting ideologies that we may not actually personally believe in.
Or know anything about, right?
Right, yes.
Hang on, I've got to put my cat down. That's a very good question, and it's so complicated that, my answer as an American white cisgendered woman of privilege can't really cover it all in just a few sentences, but I will tell you my personal experience about what's going on in the media right now. First of all, the whole stereotyping of Arabs and Muslims and Jewish people have been going on forever in media. I mean, all the way down to Disney. So you're watching as a child cartoons, Disney cartoons, and people can Google this, but Aladdin, the Disney cartoon Aladdin, had different songs with different lyrics that were much more inflammatory and stereotyping, if not just downright racist, that they changed before it was released, but it was still racist. So, but again, when you're a kid and you're just watching something, you don't have the capacity to understand that there's politics involved or in a long history of racism, systemic racism. It's really difficult to teach that to kids who are watching a Disney movie, right? I mean, I tried whenever I was raising my daughter and she was watching a Disney movie, and I kept saying not all Disney princesses have to be white, and you don't have to marry a handsome prince, and you may be, when you get older, you may be interested in another princess, or, I mean, it was difficult because you're fighting these stereotypes at all levels. So I just want to say that it isn't just now. It's like all of the stuff that's been going on for decades and decades and decades, ever since before the World War II. Everybody kind of puts the stake in the sand at, well, in World War II, this happened. No. I mean, how do you think that happened? Because of all the stuff that came before World War II and the ideologies and stuff that were privileged and the ones that were not, right? So saying all of that, I have to tell you, the propaganda game that's going on right now is impressive. It's impressive. I will watch something that comes across my feed and think, oh my gosh, that's horrible that the Palestinians did that. Well, no, they didn't do that. Hamas did that. I have friends that live in Israel that are Palestinian, and they live there peacefully. So it isn't just, it's a stereotype to say they're all like that, right? Or one side has a moral compass that's better than the other, or whatever. What is happening is horrific. The Hamas attacks were terrible. The retaliation also terrible. Who's right and who's wrong? We're going to decide by all these different countries are going to throw their hats and hitch the wagons and be affiliated and pick a side, right? But it's very, very complicated. And I will watch something come across my feed from the other side going, oh my gosh, that sounds believable as well. So the propaganda machines, they've learned how to get to us. They know how to do it, and they are totally doing it. Just the October 17th bombing of the hospital, mainstream media totally got that wrong. Everybody, the networks, New York Times, and you have to be very, very careful. You should be careful all the time. Let me say that for the record. But you really need to be careful when thousands and thousands of lives are at stake. And you think the numbers that you're quoting today are going to be all in and all it. It's going to get worse and worse until we're all desensitized. And it's like, yeah, the Middle East, they're always having problems. And really associating those numbers with human beings and human lives and the future of the children watching their parents be killed or having to be raised by strangers or whatever is going to happen. Rebuilding of cities, all of it. So dehumanizing is the easiest and fastest way to get somebody to believe like it's just numbers and you can't help it. Humanizing it is what the propaganda machines are all doing right now. They're showing you photographs of things that never happened, videos of things that happened a long time ago in a different war. They don't care. They're just going out there to get information to try to convince you. So it is difficult to say just stay with the facts, because where do you find those facts? Well, I don't know. The New York Times is a pretty big newspaper. It's been around forever. You would think you would be getting facts from them, but even they still make mistakes, right? So I believe one of the problems is, and you can't solve it, is that it's unregulated. It's an unregulated situation. In the United States, we have freedom of press. It's in our Constitution. So you can't really censor it, right? Because that would be censoring free speech. But if you're a doctor in this country, you have to take a board certified exam and stay up to date. And if you don't follow the rules, they can take your license to practice away. If you're a lawyer, you can be disbarred. But if you're a journalist and you fake something or you get it wrong or whatever, and you don't make it right, okay. Wow, bummer. I guess you'll just have to put a correction on page 10 that says, oh, we said it was this, but what it really was that. And that's supposed to be good enough, right? So what I urge people to do is don't go to one source and get out of your comfort zone. If you, in this example, if you're pro-Israel, you need to be still reading something or watching YouTube videos or something from a respected, from their point of view, organization. It could be a video organization. It could be a newspaper. And everybody's translating everything in English, so America has no use there, right? But you should be listening to as many sources as you have time to listen to, and don't just go to one. Because if you go to one, it's like going to a party full of 200 people. There was a fight in the back room. There was something going on in the kitchen, and they were learning a new recipe, and there was the people out in the pool. If you only go out to the people at the pool and say, how was the party? And they were going to be like, great, we were out here swimming. And then you'd be like, well, what about the recipes, and what about the fight in the other room? What? You can't just get one point of view to understand the full situation. You have got to do your due diligence and get out of your, like, I watch news reports from networks that I don't agree with at all, but I still do it. And I'm constantly showing other people how that works. And since we talked about my family earlier, I've gone and showed my dad, this is your Facebook page, and this is mine. Same news story. Same exact thing that happened today. And look what yours is saying about it, and look what mine is saying about it. And I always take screen captures of my dad's Facebook page for my students too. This is what my dad's looking at, and this is what I'm looking at. And I don't even know what y'all are looking at, you know? And so the students will bring me screenshots of theirs, which look different than mine, et cetera, et cetera. It just depends on what you're into. So I say, talk to as many people as you can, all different kinds of people. Talk to somebody who's actually from there, if you can. And if you don't know anybody who's from there, you should, right? I'm not saying it's like, this is my one Iranian friend. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, you know,
right.
This is my one friend from Israel. This is my one friend from Palestine. You can't do that. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying you should be talking to people who, or tuning in at least to people who have life experience of what is going on over there. I don't have life experience of what's going on over there. I've never been in a war zone. I've never had to run. Several of my friends have had to spend days in bunkers. When they come out, we call them and we all talk. And I've never had to be in a bunker. So I would really urge people to, when you're saying facts, check out facts from multiple perspectives. Even if it's just to solidify your own position, even if it's like, well, I don't disagree with that, but you should at least know what that is. I just don't think enough people know exactly what really is going on there, right?
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of
fog
effort.
of war, right?
Right. It's like, well, there's going to be war someplace. They've always done, well, if we're going to be throwing some weapons in and being allies, don't you think we should at least understand, like, why it's always been like that?
Paying for them. Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of my biggest concerns is the narrative, the media narratives that are leading to apathy or certain kinds of empathy. Well, like what I recently saw, you may be familiar with him, Yale professor, who's written a lot of books, William James Jennings. And I recently got to see him speak at Vanderbilt, and he talked about, towards the end of his talk, his lecture, which he was talking about the word and the action of ownership and possession. And he went back in historical context and the beginnings of the United States and how it started in this sense of ownership and possession. At the end of the lecture, he talked about whose story are you in? Whose story are you a part of? And that has stuck with me. That has stuck with me. Like, it's just like, okay, critical thinking is what we teach in our courses at San Jose State, in our department, in radio, television, film, theater. You and I both teach these courses. It has guided our lives around sharpening these critical thinking skills. And they're absolutely necessary given the narratives that are out there. You said the propaganda machine. And what qualifies as a fact, with the fog of war, it's like, you don't really know what's actually happening. And there are people that are available on LinkedIn that are freely and openly sharing their stories, professional stories, personal stories, family stories. And if you're going through this level of trauma and you're still willing to educate, we owe them our attention, our gratitude, our support. We need to hire them. We need to support them in all of the ways. We need to listen. We need to pay attention and let them lead. And so, going and finding those sources, whether it's, these news organizations, as Dr. Massey is talking about, and also people with the lived experiences, which you can easily find on LinkedIn. And for those of us who don't have that direct impact, like you, like me, we have a responsibility because we're still a part of it, right? As long as we are U.S. citizens, and there's so much documentation of what's happening, which I haven't seen at the level of precedence and availability due to social media related to other events.
It's funny because the Vietnam War was known as the first war to be brought into your living room, right? Because the wars prior to that, you just heard whatever you were told from the government through newspaper articles and whatever, but you didn't actually see it, right? And so when I was a kid, we all had POW bracelets that they handed out, and you would watch the TV every night to see if your prisoner of war, number 56293 or whatever, got off the planes. So you were seeing POWs get off airplanes and limping or being missing limbs. You were seeing, I'm sure, very carefully chosen footage coming from the front. But then you also had people like Edward R. Murrow, who was on the front in radio and then ultimately on television, bringing you reports from a trusted source, right? So all of a sudden you were seeing it. And you were, since then we've seen like the bombs being dropped like a video game on things. And this is pretty unprecedented, but it's following the trend of everybody's got a phone, everybody can, we were seeing the music festival where those people were being kidnapped because we had video of the chaos and some of the hostages being taken, right? So yeah, there's so much. It's very traumatizing to watch it all, true, but it's very difficult to sift through it. And that's why I think you need to keep, diversifying your looking at things from different viewpoints and different sources so that you get a better picture of how to think about it, but also what the people making the choices are thinking about it. They're looking at the same stuff. You don't think that our president has somebody or a team of God knows how many people sifting through, maybe the CIA, I don't know who's doing it, but somebody's watching social media constantly and saying, well, this is what the public mind is. This one is really being circulated and people are really clicking on it. So that one's important for us to think about, right? Because the public mind is thinking about it. So they're watching, the same stuff. President number 45 is constantly commenting on things that he sees in the media. And so that's what's going on in his head and what he's communicating about. So I feel like just really getting outside your comfort zone and don't only consume things that agree with your point of view. The part about being American, at least, that's the most wonderful is that we can have alternative points of view. Sometimes they're really difficult. Like if you disagree with what your government's doing, oh, you're anti-American. Oh, you're not a patriot. Oh, all of that. But that's kind of what we were based on. That's what our whole Constitution is about. That's why we have freedom of press, freedom of speech, so that alternate voices or voices that disagree we can disagree and can be without going to prison or being killed or whatever, right? So if you're not doing that, then you're not really democracy, as they say, is not a noun, it's a verb, right? If you're not doing that kind of work to honor and to consume the freedom of press, freedom of speech, part of our Constitution, then it's not being exercised. And whenever you do make a choice to vote or something, you won't be fully informed to make a good decision, right? That's the whole purpose of having that freedom, is so that you can vote or that you can do your part. And your part as a citizen is supposed to be participating in democracy, right?
As communicators with this background and how we ingest and where we're getting our sources and stuff, it's that leveling up and really recognizing that there's human beings literally in the crossfire here, whether it's the physical danger or the emotional and intellectual danger that we find out of the war zone. There's still a battle going on for minds, attitudes, behaviors. And we know that language leads to behavior. That's a big
Absolutely.
thing that we teach here.
Language always comes before. Yeah, always comes before action. It does. Yeah. But I also want to say that it's easy for me to say this because this is what I get paid to do, right? Somebody who's not being paid to think about these things or consume a variety of media things can go, well, nice that you have all this time to do that, Dr. Massey, right? I mean, even Dr. Massey, right? Somehow I got a degree somewhere along the line that I probably got into school easier or something because I'm a privileged white cisgendered woman, right? But there is another way, and that is if you don't have time to do all of that, you can still participate there's a theory called the two-step flow, by following people who are from that group that are writing about it, artists that are writing music about it or doing paintings, so the art community is communicating information who are direct participants in the situation. Writers, movie makers, I mean, some of the most influential ideas have been put forward by film, right? So you can go watch a movie that's about racism that was written by Black people or directed by a Black director or whatever. You can do that. And that's the whole pandemic, supporting Black Lives Matter, supporting Black businesses, buying things from Black-owned businesses or whatever. Going to the source is what I call it. Going to the source. I am not the source. I'm a kiosk. I'm like when you go to the mall and you want to know where the shoe store is, look at the kiosk and then I'll tell you where the shoe store is. That's my role as an educator, is not to say, here's the Black point of view, but here are some Black points of view. Let me help you get there, and then they'll tell you other places to go too. You don't just have to go where I say, go to where they say. And because there's plenty of people out there doing that work to save time to help people better understand the situation at hand, which changes all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Massey, thank you so much. As you're going to be an ongoing contributor to Communicate Like You Give a Damn. I look forward to the next time that you're here.
Well, thank you for having me.
How can people contact you if they have questions?
You can always email me at Kimb with a B, that's KIMB .Massey, MASSEY, at sjsu.edu. So that's my work email, and I'm always available that way. So thank you, Kim, for having me. I really appreciate it. I always I appreciate what you and Janet have done, and I appreciate that you're continuing on in other capacities, like with podcasts and whatever, to keep doing this work and helping other people learn how to do it.
Learn how to communicate like we give a damn. Thank you, Dr.
Right.
Massey. We'll see you again soon.
Okay.
So what popped out to you from the conversation? The more conscious communicators in the world, the better the world. So go to communicatelikeyougiveadamn.podcast.com and set up a one-on-one strategy session. And until next time, let's keep taking care of each other.